German prosecutors say he is dangerous and should be fitted with an ankle tag. Bruckner denies any involvement in Madeleine McCann's disappearance. The 3-year-old vanished from the Portuguese resort of Praia da Luz in 2007.
For more than 16 years, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann haunted the world. A 3-year-old child vanished without a trace, and despite global headlines, endless investigations, and millions of dollars spent, no one could explain how or why.
But despite huge efforts being made, including an e-fit of a potential suspect, no clue had been found.
Now, after nearly 2 decades, that silence has finally been broken. But what investigators uncovered is not the answer anyone expected. It is darker, stranger, and far more disturbing than the world was prepared to hear. The disappearance that shook the world. On the night of May 3, 2007, the McCann family was enjoying a holiday in the peaceful seaside village of Praia da Luz, Portugal. But what began as a relaxing break quickly turned into one of the most chilling and haunting missing person cases the world has ever seen.
Breaking news for you this morning. We're just hearing that a search is underway for a 3-year-old British girl who's gone missing in the Algarve area of Portugal.
Jerry and Kate McCann, a British couple, had come to the Ocean Club resort with their 3 children. Madeleine, just 3 years old, and her younger twin brother and sister. Like many parents staying at the resort, they planned to spend their evenings dining at the tapas restaurant nearby, while the children slept in their apartment just a short walk away. To keep watch over the children, the adults agreed to take turns going back to their rooms, every 20 to 30 minutes. The McCanns left the sliding glass patio door of their apartment unlocked, so they could slip in and out without waking the kids. Around 9 p.m., Jerry left the table and walked the short distance back to their ground floor apartment. Inside, the children were fast asleep. He checked on Madeleine and the twins. Everything looked peaceful. Satisfied, he returned to the restaurant and sat back down, unaware that their world was just minutes from breaking apart. Close to 10 p.m., it was Kate's turn. She stood up from the table and walked quickly across the resort, expecting to find her children still sound asleep. But the moment she stepped into the apartment, something felt wrong. The door to the children's bedroom was slightly ajar. She walked over to the beds. The twins were sleeping, just as they had been, but Madeleine's bed was empty.
She switched on the light, and she saw the twins. They were in their cribs, but Madeleine was not.
Kate froze, staring at the small, crumpled blanket, heart pounding. She ran from room to room, flinging open doors, searching the wardrobes, scanning every corner of the apartment in blind panic. But Madeleine was nowhere. The shock broke into terror. Kate screamed her lungs out, calling her daughter's name over and over, but there was no response. Overwhelmed, she bolted out the door and sprinted back to the restaurant. Bursting inside, gasping for air, she cried out the words that would echo across headlines for years to come. "They've taken her. Madeleine's gone." Chaos immediately followed. Jerry sprinted to the apartment. Friends scattered across the resort, yelling Madeleine's name, checking behind buildings, under bushes, anywhere a small child could hide. Resort staff joined in. The local police were quickly called, but there was no sign of Madeleine. At first, some believed she had simply wandered off, but as the minutes dragged into hours and no trace of her was found, that hope slipped away. It became clear something far worse had happened. By morning, the news was spreading fast. Flyers were printed and handed out. Volunteers searched the nearby beaches and streets. The Portuguese police launched a full investigation, but answers were nowhere to be found. As days passed, the story exploded across the media. International news outlets flooded into Praia da Luz. Madeleine's photo, a small smiling girl with bright blue-green eyes and a distinct mark in her right eye, was suddenly everywhere. Kate and Jerry made emotional appeals to the public. They begged for help. They pleaded for their daughter's return.
If you have Madeleine, let her come home to her mummy, daddy, brother and sister.
Kate often clutched Madeleine's favorite toy, a small toy cat, as she stood before the cameras. Jerry tried to remain composed, but the exhaustion and fear showed in his face.
We want a review, absolutely, that is our number one thing. We think it should be done, it's the right thing.
World leaders took notice. The Pope met with the McCanns and offered his prayers.
He was very kind, very sincere, and that he continued to pray for Madeleine's safe return to us.
Celebrities joined the call to find her. Footballers wore yellow wristbands in Madeleine's name. People across the globe felt drawn to the story, heartbroken by the image of a missing little girl and her devastated family. But even with all the attention, the investigation began to stall. Tips came in but led nowhere. Questions began to swirl. Why had the door been left unlocked? Why was there no sign of forced entry? Why hadn't anyone heard anything? Some began to wonder if there was more to the story. A new and darker chapter was beginning, one that would be filled with dead ends, bitter accusations, and haunting silence. The theories, the accusations, and the long road to Operation Grange. Soon, the case was overwhelmed by a tidal wave of theories. Some were based on real concerns and inconsistencies. Others were wild, baseless, and disturbingly cruel.
You're on vacation with your family and all of a sudden your daughter disappears. Something so tragic that it could happen to anyone.
The media couldn't get enough. Neither could the public. False sightings poured in from every corner of the globe. A blonde girl was spotted with a strange man in Morocco. A child who looked like Madeleine was seen in a cafe in Belgium. Another possible match was reported in a shopping mall in Australia. Each report triggered a frenzy.
On one day alone, she had been seen in places 2,500 miles apart.
Hope surged. Could this be her? But every time, the excitement crashed into heartbreak and the trail would grow cold again. And then, things got even darker. Portuguese police made a stunning announcement. Madeleine's own parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, were now official suspects. The news shocked millions. The same parents who had pleaded with the world to help find their daughter were now being investigated for possibly having a hand in her death.
To me, it kind of looked like the police on the ground didn't know where else to look.
Investigators claimed there were inconsistencies in their stories. They also pointed to DNA traces. Forensic teams reported that hair and bodily fluid samples taken from the McCann's holiday apartment appeared similar to Madeleine's profile. Even more troubling, tiny traces said to match her DNA were reported in the boot of a rental car the couple hired 3 weeks after she went missing. To police, this suggested her body might have been placed there and moved. Investigators believed the McCanns could have been covering up an accidental death inside the apartment, hiding her body to avoid blame, and then disposing of it later. Suddenly, Kate and Jerry weren't seen only as grieving parents anymore. Some saw them as something far more sinister. The media turned vicious. Headlines screamed accusations.
Close to where the British toddler vanished from her parents' holiday apartment in 2007.
The McCanns were followed, harassed, and torn apart in the press. Online, the abuse was relentless. They were accused of lying and faking their emotions. It was a nightmare. The McCanns maintained their innocence through it all. They insisted they had nothing to hide. In 2008, Portuguese authorities dropped their suspect status due to a complete lack of evidence. Later reviews showed the material was too degraded, mixed with other DNA, and not a conclusive match. Experts ruled it unreliable and far too weak to prove anything against the McCanns. Even though they were cleared, suspicion still followed them. As the years passed, the case became colder, but it never stopped haunting people. Then, in 2011, the British government gave in to mounting public pressure and launched Operation Grange, a massive undertaking by the Metropolitan Police.
Police have swarmed on a stretch of Portuguese coastline.
It was a top-to-bottom review of every interview, photo, and overlooked clue. But as the years went by, the big breakthrough never came. Still, the case refused to fade. Then, as the 10-year anniversary approached, something surfaced. Something that sent a chill down the spines of investigators. A man, Christian Bruckner, who had never been at the center of the case before, was suddenly drawing attention.
Bruckner denies involvement, soon to be a free man.
The man behind the darkness. It all began in 2070 when a former acquaintance of Christian Bruckner, a convicted German offender, was watching the anniversary news coverage on TV with him.
Of the prime suspect in the case, German pedophile and Christian Bruckner.
The images of the missing 3-year-old flashed across the screen. Then, out of nowhere, Bruckner turned to him and said something that sent a chill down his spine. "I know what happened." The words hit like a punch. The man froze. There was no hint of emotion in Bruckner's voice, just cold certainty. He didn't explain.
Police confirmed Christian Bruckner was driven out of jail by his lawyer.
But in that instant, something felt very wrong. The man couldn't shake it. He later reported the encounter, still disturbed by the memory, but it wasn't the only red flag. Another witness would soon come forward with a story that was just as shocking. At a carefree music festival, in the middle of the crowd, Bruckner had made a horrifying comment. Laughing and drinking, he leaned in and said, "Madeleine didn't scream." The casual tone, the cruelty. It was so jarring the witness immediately felt sick. The words were burned into their memory, and they wasted no time in informing the police. That's when investigators started connecting the dots. Christian Bruckner was no stranger to law enforcement. He already had a long record of crimes, including rape of a 72-year-old woman in the Algarve in 2005, an attack so violent it shocked even hardened detectives.
Bruckner remains a key figure in Scotland Yard's ongoing Operation Grange inquiry.
He was finally convicted of that crime in 2019, more than a decade later, and sentenced to 7 years in prison by a German court. But investigators now saw something even more disturbing. In 2007, at the time of Madeleine's disappearance, Bruckner had been living in Praia da Luz, the very resort town where she vanished. Bruckner also had no permanent home. He drifted between a filthy, crumbling house and an old van. That van, investigators learned, had been parked just minutes away from the Ocean Club resort where Madeleine had vanished. And then came the bombshell. Phone records showed Bruckner had received a call on the very night Madeleine vanished. Not just any call, a call placed near the Ocean Club at the exact time she went missing. That one detail changed everything. Now he wasn't just near the scene, he was there, in the thick of it. But despite the growing mountain of proof, prosecutors were up against a wall. Under German law, much of what they had uncovered couldn't be directly tied to Madeleine's case. It was deeply infuriating. What followed was an unraveling of Bruckner's long, disturbing history and an intensifying global focus on finally bringing him to justice. Critical failures and missed opportunities. Law enforcement agencies across Europe made a series of devastating and at times almost unbelievable mistakes that allowed Bruckner to stay one step ahead of justice for years. At nearly every crucial turn, something went wrong.
Now the prime suspect, Christian Bruckner, is on the cusp of freedom.
And every mistake gave him more time and more chances to cover his tracks. One of the worst blunders came in 2017, a moment that would haunt investigators for years to come. German police sent Bruckner an official letter asking him to come into the station. It wasn't just a routine summons. It was about Madeleine's case. But instead of keeping the reason confidential, they actually wrote Madeleine's name in the letter. That single error gave Bruckner a 3-day head start. Journalist Tom Clark later described the moment in his book, My Search for Madeleine. His words were blunt and unforgettable. They messed up, Clark said. They actually wrote it on the letter. Who knows what happened in those 3 days? The answer to that question is terrifying because no one knows. In those 72 hours, Bruckner could have done anything. He could have destroyed evidence, warned anyone who might turn on him, or even disappeared for good. But that wasn't the only red flag. Local police in Braunschweig had already been watching Bruckner. They had been digging into his background and were deeply alarmed by what they found. Allegations of child exploitation, violent assault, and possible involvement in trafficking. They raised the alarm. They pushed the warnings up the chain. But federal authorities dismissed the concerns, arguing the evidence was too weak and fragmented to justify a major case. No action was taken, and Bruckner kept slipping through.
And Bethany, why, when Christian Bruckner is considered the main suspect in the Madeleine McCann disappearance case?
Then, in 2018, came another jaw-dropping discovery. German police raided an abandoned factory once used by Bruckner. The site had been his hideout and storage base, a place where he kept stolen property, vehicles, and personal belongings he didn't want traced back to him. What they found inside was beyond disturbing.
Property in Germany, they found USB drives with pictures and videos of child abuse.
There were 75 girls' swimsuits, firearms, and dangerous chemicals. And perhaps most horrifying of all was an 80-gigabyte hard drive loaded with vile, depraved child exploitation content.
They found 75 toddlers' swimsuits. There were preschooler bikes and toys.
There were also chat logs, messages, and fragments of conversations. In one message, Bruckner casually talked about wanting to capture something small and use it for days. That sentence alone chilled investigators to the core. The horror was right there in black and white. They were no longer just dealing with a man who might have known something. They were looking at a predator, a monster, hiding in plain sight. The evidence told a terrifying story. But then came the legal blow. None of it could be used to charge him in Madeleine's case. The files were tied to other crimes, and the law kept them separate. Technically, legally, the pieces didn't fit.
Some images of these disturbing discoveries have never been shown before.
It was heartbreaking. It was infuriating. Investigators knew what they were looking at. They knew who they were dealing with, but they had to watch him remain free. Still, they didn't stop. Not for a moment. Step by step, they kept going and connecting dots others had missed. Then, in June 2020, after years of silence, German prosecutors made the bold move. They named Christian Bruckner as the prime suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine. It was a moment that reignited the case around the world. And painfully, a picture of what might have really happened to Madeleine on that night in Praia de Luz began to form. New testimonies and the most chilling theory yet. In 2024, during a courtroom proceeding for an entirely separate case, German detective Titus Stampa took the stand and delivered a revelation that sent a wave of shock and dread through everyone listening. His words tore open an old wound that had never healed. In a calm but chilling tone, Stampa revealed that investigators had uncovered a hidden email account linked to Bruckner. Though the contents of the account were not fully disclosed, Stampa said investigators believed it was directly related to the disappearance of Madeleine. That single sentence froze the room. After all the years, all the questions, it suddenly felt terrifyingly close to an answer. But there was more. Stampa revealed that a second email account, also tied to Bruckner, had been used to exchange disturbing child exploitation material.
Showing prosecutors in Germany may now have a second witness to alleged Bruckner confession.
Records showed the account was deliberately wiped clean in early 2007. The timing alarmed investigators because it was just weeks before Madeleine vanished. They believed the deletion was not random. It suggested Bruckner had purged messages, images, or plans that could have exposed his intentions. To police, it looked like a calculated move to erase incriminating evidence before carrying out something horrific. Later that year, a large-scale search operation was launched across the Algarve. German and Portuguese police, supported by British investigators, joined forces in a race against time. They searched 20 remote plots of land, drained deep wells, and used ground-penetrating radar to scan beneath the soil. Every movement was filled with urgency and quiet desperation. They were chasing a ghost, hoping to find even the smallest clue that could lead them to Madeleine. Though no discoveries were made public, something had changed behind the scenes. Investigators now believed they finally understood what most likely happened on the night she vanished.
The same year, the witness claimed he confided in him. However, the suspect has never been formally charged over the missing Brit.
The new theory was devastating. Based on evidence and witness accounts, authorities believe Bruckner had been watching the Ocean Club for days. He had been seen lurking near the McCann's apartment, eyeing the area and waiting. And on the night of May 3, 2007, they believe he finally struck. Detectives now think Bruckner lured Madeleine away from the apartment. Authorities believe he may have used sweets, toys, or kind words to gain her trust, anything that would make her feel safe enough to follow. The thought is gut-wrenching. A little girl, innocent and full of life, may have happily walked out into the night with a stranger who had evil in his heart.
When she vanished from the couple's holiday apartment in the Algarve resort at Praia de Luz in May 2007.
Bruckner is believed to have taken Madeleine in his van to a remote shack or an isolated beach house he used. What happened there is almost too painful to imagine. Investigators believe Bruckner took Madeleine against her will and stole her innocence in a moment of pure cruelty. She was all alone. There was no one to help her, and then they believe he ended her life by suffocation. It is thought that he buried her body near the Barragem du Arad reservoir, a place remote enough that he felt safe. That site has now been searched multiple times. So far, nothing definitive has been found, but investigators remain convinced. He's not just a dangerous offender, said investigator Tom Clark. He's someone who finds pleasure in inflicting pain. Clark's voice was heavy, full of anger and sorrow. For investigators, this reconstruction, no matter how horrifying, gave them what they had been missing for years. A theory that made sense, one that connected the evidence, the witness sightings, and the timeline. But as powerful as it was still just a theory. And in a court of law, theories are not enough. The public's attention was reignited, but the path to justice remained painfully uncertain. Renewed efforts to bring Bruckner to justice. In early 2025, Christian Bruckner was arrested once again, but on 5 separate and deeply disturbing charges, unrelated to Madeleine's case.
Police confirmed Christian Bruckner was driven out of jail by his lawyer.
The charges included 3 and 2 acts of child exploitation, all alleged to have taken place in Portugal between 2000 and 2017. Each accusation was horrifying on its own. Together, they painted a chilling portrait of a man prosecutors described as calculating, predatory, and remorseless. For investigators who had spent years circling Bruckner as their prime suspect in Madeleine's disappearance, this arrest felt like a breakthrough. It gave them hope that justice, in some form, might finally catch up to him. Prosecutors believed these cases could be used to expose a clear pattern of violent behavior. They hoped it would open legal pathways to strengthen the connection between Bruckner and what they believe happened on the night of May 3, 2007. Across 3 countries, Germany, Portugal, and the UK, law enforcement agencies doubled down. They worked side by side, sharing evidence, chasing leads, and poring over case files that had been dormant for years. The mood was intense. Investigators knew the window of opportunity might not stay open for long. Then, in a devastating turn of events, that momentum came crashing to a sudden halt. In September 2025, Bruckner was released from custody.
Christian B has been serving a 7-year sentence for the of an elderly woman in Praia da Luz in 2007.
A German court acquitted him of several charges, citing insufficient physical evidence and the expiration of key statutes of limitations. The ruling sent shockwaves across Europe. There was outrage in the press, fury from the public, and disbelief among the officers and prosecutors who had fought so hard to get him behind bars. They had no doubt Bruckner remained a danger, a ticking time bomb walking free. But the legal system had spoken. Still, they refused to let him vanish back into the shadows. To keep him under control, strict probationary measures were imposed immediately. He will wear an electronic ankle monitor for 5 years as part of his probationary supervision, said lead prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters in a public statement to the BBC. He must also report to a probation officer at least once a month and must seek court permission for any change of residence. The conditions were firm, but they weren't enough to quieten public fear or ease the rage of those who believed this man had gotten away with far too much for far too long. Still, behind the scenes, the investigation into Madeleine's disappearance is very much alive and far from over.
Madeleine McCann's disappearance rates with the Lindbergh baby as, the disappearance of a child.
Investigators are returning to old evidence with renewed urgency. One major focus is the 2018 factory raid, where authorities had uncovered a collection of deeply disturbing materials, including hard drives, photos, and videos. They are now revisiting the contents piece by piece, asking whether any of it could finally be tied legally and directly to Madeleine's case. As the legal battle rages on, another voice is rising again, quieter but just as powerful. The parents of Madeleine McCann, who had lived through years of heartbreak, silence, and cruel speculation, are speaking out once more. The McCann's reactions and the legacy of a global case. On May 3, 2024, the 17th anniversary of Madeleine's disappearance, Kate and Jerry McCann shared a message that cut straight to the heart. "It's hard to even say that number without shaking our heads in disbelief," they wrote. "Living in limbo is still very unsettling, but your support continues to encourage us and bolsters our strength to keep going."
Madeleine is a beautiful, bright, funny and caring little girl. She is so special.
Kate and Jerry are now parents to teenage twins who have grown up under the shadow of their sister's disappearance. The family has carried the weight of that night in Portugal every single day since. But through their grief, they've built something powerful. The Find Madeleine campaign became more than a search. It became a mission. Over the years, they've supported other families of missing children, pushed for new laws, and helped reform how international agencies handle these cases. Now, the latest developments in the case have reopened old wounds. The idea that Madeleine may have trusted her abductor, even for a brief moment, before being taken away and harmed, is a thought that shatters them. And yet, through the anguish, they remain strong. "We know the love and hope for Madeleine and the will to find her, even after so many years remains," they said. "We are truly thankful for that." Madeleine's name has become a symbol of the fight for truth that never ends. The impact of her story lives on in every law written to protect a child, in every parent who holds their child a little tighter, and most of all, in Kate and Jerry, in their quiet strength, their unshakable love, and the pain they carry every single day. Because for them, this isn't just history. It's still happening, and they are still waiting. What do you think about Madeleine's disappearance? Comment down below. Pinned comment, what do you think about Madeleine's heartbreaking story?